One of the questions I get asked is, what can we do when we've got a micromanaging boss? There's nothing more infuriating and I guess disempowering to have a micromanaging boss. So I think all of us in our career at some point are probably going to deal with someone like that. So number one, what I would suggest to you is that this comes down to communication. Understanding communication styles. One of my favorite books is a book by Florence Lydia called Personality Plus, and she also wrote one called Personality Plus for Work. I highly encourage you to read this book. I highly recommend this book, and you can find it on my website if you're interested, timetamer.com.au. There's a list of recommended reading. But in this book, she talks about understanding our communication style. How is it that we like to give out information and receive information? But also, more importantly, to understand the communication of the style of the person that we're talking to. They may well have a different style to us. So what's really important when you're working with a manager, someone who is more senior to you, or even if you are a manager, is to clearly communicate your preference for communication. How do you want to be communicated with? So you are well within your right as an employee to be able to communicate to your manager and say, I work best when information is communicated to me like this or in this way. Another thing to look at is your learning style. There's lots of tests out there, and I encourage you to Google it to look at what your preference is in terms of how you like to learn, how you best receive instruction on taking on something new. Most of us are visual. Some of us can be kinesthetic, very touch and feel things. Some of us are very auditory. We like to be told and have someone explain it to us. And auditory digital is very much about thinking it through yourself and being taken through the steps. So having a look at your learning style also enables you to communicate with others how best you receive information, or to be aware of where you may not pick up on the information that's being given to you. So if you can communicate with your manager how best you can receive the information from them, but also to understand how they like to receive information. Sometimes we might have a manager that is very detail driven, and so they like to know everything that you're doing, which can feel like micromanagement for you, but that may be the way that they like to receive information. So getting a clear indication of how they like to communicate will help in that process. It's really important through this communication that you learn the principles of assertiveness. Now, I'm not talking about being overly confident or being aggressive. Every one of us has the right to assert our own wants and needs, and to be able to communicate that in a way that is professional or with a level of emotional intelligence, so that we're not getting people offside. So some of the ways that you might need to assert yourself are soft no's. So this is a way of being able to say no to something without being aggressive or confrontational or passive in your response. It can be things like, how urgent is this for you? Or asking a question like, if I get this to you by Friday, will that be okay? Or is this something that needs to be done by me, or could this be better managed by someone else? These are the kind of questions that you can ask someone that are a soft no. Sometimes something that's difficult with working with a manager is that you can come into conflict about your belief on the way something that can be done. You might be asked to do something that you disagree with. You don't feel that it's the best way to do something, but it's being forced and imposed upon you. What's really important through this process and for your own professional development is to take this approach. Make sure you communicate your alternative way of doing something and your rationale for doing it. Make sure you communicate your objection or your opinion about why you feel it's not the best approach without being aggressive, but making sure you're communicating this without too much emotional passion in your objection. Just putting forward your opinion, your belief, and your ideas around an alternative or the reason you don't agree with something moving forward. Then the next step is to take on board the instruction that the manager is giving you. Even though it may feel uncomfortable, follow the process that they've asked you to do. It's really important you communicate your solution and your objection to a process in a professional manner before you start the process of taking on board what they've asked you to do, because this is what can happen as an outcome from that. There's two possible outcomes. One is that you are proven wrong and the process that you've followed has actually been the better one. And in doing so, you've learned something new. You've learned something through that experience. You may have learned that there is a different way, a better way, or you've learned some new skills. Or alternatively, you are proven right. So you are able to go back to your manager and again, in a professional, subtle way, and say, I told you so. You're able to say, remember how I said this? This is what's actually happened. Can I recommend that we try my method now? That's one approach. So it's a difficult pill to swallow, and it is difficult to do sometimes, is going against your grain and going against your instinct of what you think should happen, but it can create for a greater outcome. And the fourth thing I would recommend is having very clear boundaries. I can remember an experience where I was being micromanaged, where somebody was wanting to, my manager was wanting to take all the glory in a project, run with the element of the project that would normally come under my banner, and it was a big load, but he decided to take the component of that project that took all the glory. And he was supposed to be my supervisor and my manager, while I had a level of responsibility with some of the task. Now, what happened in that situation is that I was assigned work to do, and he decided to take ownership of a project. What was really important and a big learning process for me through that experience was to set clear boundaries. And so I made sure I communicated very clearly with him what was my responsibility and what was his responsibility. Because what I was finding is he was starting to treat me like his personal assistant rather than someone he was managing. So offloading his work to me in an effort for him to take the kudos for a very public and high profile element of the project. So I made sure it was really clear boundaries around what was his responsibility and what was mine, so that I could then question when things were being handballed to me. Is this meant to be under my load? Is this my responsibility, or is this yours? And the other thing that I found with him was that he wanted to approve all of the work that I was doing. He wanted to have control over it. He wanted to have sign off. And again, there wasn't clear boundaries. He was wanting control over the stuff that was going to give him kudos, but then not everything. So once again, I set clear boundaries and I guess procedure around that. So I confirmed, do you need sign off on everything? Yes or no? If no, which things are you signing off on and which things aren't you signing off on and wanting approval before it goes ahead? And so his power position, he said, I want sign off on everything. So ultimately what happened was me going, can't do anything till you sign this off, can't do anything till you sign this off, can't do anything until you sign this off, can't do anything until you sign this off. And he got exhausted. And ultimately he ended up relinquishing the role as manager because he was doing it quite badly. So the key to this is beat them at their own game. And the way that you do that is get very, very clear on your boundaries and very, very clear on the protocols, procedures, and process so that you can beat them at their own game. And working within those boundaries, getting very, very clear about what's within my job, what's not. What am I taking ownership of? What aren't I taking ownership of? What do you need to see? And what don't you need to see? How do you want that communicated? When do you not want that communicated? If you set those boundaries around your communication process and procedure, you might find that you feel less stumped by this constant control of the manager that feels like it's micromanaging. If you've got any other tips, ideas, thoughts around this, how you've handled a micromanager, I would love to hear your